Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cloud Wars Live, where we explore today's digital revolution by speaking with business executives and thought leaders who are changing how the world lives, works, plays, learns, and dreams. Our guest today is Sean Ammirati, venture capitalist, CMU professor, serial entrepreneur, author, and recently a podcaster. Sean, welcome. Thanks for coming back to Cloud Wars Live.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Sean's one of our monthly digital all-stars, and the series here with Sean that we've been discussing is Ammirati on innovation. So Sean, we got a couple things that I know you wanted to talk about here relative to inside the tech industry and outside the tech industry. How should companies sort of place their bets across the thing of what do I build myself? What do I partner on? What do I invest in? But first, tell us a little bit about how your podcast is going, because it looks like you're a professional studio there.
Thanks. Yeah, we're in my podcast studio today. So it's been fun. It's been, I started the Corporate Startup Lab about 2 years ago, and it really started with a bunch of conversations, as you know, Bob, with people who are leading innovation for a lot of these large companies. And after about a year and a half of having those conversations, I thought, like, man, it would be great to actually share these conversations with people, not just the notes that I have from them, but the actual conversations. And so we started a podcast called Agile Giants, which allows us to actually unpack some of those conversations with these corporate innovators. The last 2 episodes we did was one with the person who leads innovation for part of Highmark, which is the Blue Cross Blue Shield here in Pittsburgh. And the one before that was with Tanya Baker, who leads GS Accelerate, which is Goldman Sachs' internal accelerator, which was interesting as well.
Yeah, it should be. So, Sean, just before we jump into our main conversation, that the name of your podcast, Agile Giants.
Yep.
How many or what percentage would you say of big companies sort of get the notion of being an Agile Giant? How are they proceeding?
I think that most of them get it from an aspirational perspective. I think where the rubber meets the road, a lot of them are still trying to figure it out, and they're trying to figure it out in a couple of different ways. So, I was talking to a large automotive company last week or 2 weeks ago, I'm sorry. And, they're trying to slap Agile on everything. And by that, they just mean get things done faster. And certainly I'm all for getting things done quicker as well. But there's actually some science behind this approach to being more agile in it, right? And then, we talked the last time I was on with you, Bob, about SAP, and I thought it was interesting. After that conversation, I saw your conversation with both Bill and Ryan at the SAP conference, right? And you can see these large companies, they're struggling with vocabulary outside of the Agile part of it, but they're realizing exactly what we talked about, which is, man, there are real advantages to being an incumbent in this space. And we talked last time about Disney versus Netflix.
Yes.
There's real advantages to being the Disney in that conversation. And I think it was neat to watch your conversations with both Bill and Ryan. As you can see, I felt like both of them in their own way were saying, like, look, we know there's a there. And the results certainly show that there's momentum behind the strategy that they have. But I think companies are still beginning to put into. And that's what we're trying to figure out with the Corporate Startup Lab and with the podcast and a lot of this work.
Sean, when you mentioned the aspirational part of it, that sounds a little bit like the basketball topic that I brought up with TJ Graven, who is the Senior VP of Global IT for Under Armour. And he's a customer of both Qualtrics and SAP. And I talked to him at the Sapphire event. And at the end, I said, hey, I know Under Armour's got a lot of, big name brands or people, that they're spokesmen, they're making their celebrities for the Under Armour brand. I said, there's a category of probably over 50, not very good, but interested athletes. I said, I would love to be sort of your spokesperson for that, And he said, he's not going to rule it out, but that I shouldn't drop everything else, in anticipation of that. That's
You're not wearing an Under Armour shirt today. So that's, I guess it hasn't happened yet is the point, right? So.
No, but Sean, there's time. So
that's good.
Hey, so man, tell us about what you were thinking here, because inside the tech industry and outside the tech industry, right, we're seeing some of these movements in the cloud business of all companies, Oracle, which either loves everybody equally or hates everybody equally, but they've decided for once they are going to form a partnership with another tech company. And who else but Microsoft, could could be worthy of an Oracle partnership. But what do you think, Sean?
So that's exactly right. I mean, they must have short memories in Washington. But it's an interesting thing, right? So to me, the cloud industry is now demonstrating something that a lot of folks have been observing for a while. And I think it's going to be a really great case study of this question that I think every C-suite is asking right now, which is, as it comes to this over-the-horizon innovation, this transformational innovation, what do we want to do ourselves? What do we want to build internal, leveraging, as we talked about last episode, what do we want to do ourselves, leveraging those incumbency advantages? What do we want to do in partnership with others, large companies or startups? And I think there's different strategies for both of those. And what do we want to make token investments that may lead to later M&A and more kind of financial driven innovation as an approach to doing it. So I think about it as sort of, what do we want to buy? What do we want to build internally? What do we want to do via partnership? And what do we want to do either as explicit buys or growth buys? And the interesting thing about the recent news from the Oracle earnings is I think they do a really nice job, unintentionally, I suspect, but do a really nice job illustrating each of these strategies, right? So on the build side, the autonomous database to me is a great example of, now you're starting to see financial metrics that Wall Street can understand and appreciate that show the benefit of building this over the horizon innovation yourself. And you're starting to see numbers start to bear out what happens when you do that really well. I thought your Cloud Wars post did a really good job of kind of flushing through all those numbers, but you're seeing them get new customers they wouldn't have had a chance to acquire before, as well as accelerate growth. And I think when you're looking at the build part of that strategy, that's certainly part of what you're looking at. Can we deliver new value propositions to existing customers, or can we expand to adjacent customer spaces with that this new broader product suite allows us to do? And so I think the autonomous database does a really nice job of that. I actually thought the way Oracle articulated that was impressive. I thought Larry did a really nice job kind of framing that out as it's rolled out. And I think you're now starting to see financial metrics come behind that sort of bear out what happens when you execute that strategy well. I'm sure there are things that we don't know, and we won't know for years in terms of why that played out that way. But I still think it starts to illustrate this interesting point, which is, you have to have a point of view on what you want to do collaboratively, what you want to do yourself, and what you want to do through more, uses of financing, whether it be buying companies like the Qualtrics acquisition or more token venture investments. I'm a little surprised by the Oracle strategy, admittedly not knowing everything. And the thing that surprises me about it is, I think if there's one ground truth that I would always encourage a company to apply as they think about this, what do we build ourselves? What do we partner? What do we do via financing activities? It's ground truth needs to be what your customers want. And it feels like in the cloud ecosystem today, the answer to what your customers want is they want more than one neck to choke, right? They want these hybrid solutions that involve a group of vendors. And I think that's why this is going to be a really interesting ecosystem to watch, think through this build, partner, buy decision, because the customers are demanding solutions that are broader than one player. And certain, the space as well as I do, Bob, but better than I do. But it feels like there's an awful lot of people who are choosing Oracle plus SAP, and it just feels like pissing those customers off is an interesting strategy that I'm not sure I would advocate for. Admittedly, maybe not knowing all the details.
Yeah, Sean, there is that. And I think you really nailed it there, that this, we've seen a couple things come along. Larry Ellison started to talk 4 years ago. He said he called it a decade of coexistence from on-premise to cloud. And he said, then there'll be a lot of on-premise stuff that goes on forever. Then you started to hear people talk about, how do you balance that, the hybrid, now the multi-cloud dynamic that you've just described here. Customers want multiple throats to choke. They want to have different variations. And they also might find, hey, this customer or this vendor over here is really good for this. This one over here is outstanding for something else. I'm going to pick the ones that are best for me right now. And yeah, so this notion of pitting those vendors against each other, I'm not sure is the right way to go, especially now as you're saying customers have come to the forefront and they're pushing back so hard on the cloud vendors and saying, look, you got to start to pattern what you make and sell after what I need, and rather than just here's a collection of toys you've brought and said, now let's play a game together. It's just that's fine for the first 2 or 3 or 4 years of a budding industry, but at some point it's got to flip to who's giving you money.
That's right. No, and that's where this is going to be fascinating to watch how this shakes out, right? And Oracle is the easy example. That's the sort of timely news example here. But everybody in this whole ecosystem is going to need to figure it out, because the solution stack is broad. I think your Cloud Wars rankings does a good job of framing this out. Like, one of the debates I always see on social media watching it is like, well, what revenue gets included and what revenue doesn't get included in those rankings, right? And I think the reason that that's such an interesting topic today is because the stack is broad and you can't do it all. No player is going to be able to do it all. So they're going to have to build some stuff, they're going to have to partner, and they're going to have to do some investments. I think, interestingly, Salesforce has done a really good job on the venture investing side. I think, as we talked about last time, I think SAP's done a really good job on the strategic acquisition, sort of using M&A as a competitive weapon in the whole play. And certainly the space has gotten only more acquisitive since the last time we spoke, with Microsoft deciding to enter into the analytics space as well, right? So I think that's part as well known. This partner part of it is going to be really interesting to watch. Like, the enemy of my enemy is my friends. Oracle has now decided to make some enemies. That's going to be interesting to see how that ripples out to the rest of the ecosystem. It's going to be, I think, 5 years from now, a really interesting case study on what do you do yourself, what do you do in collaboration, and how to use finance and M&A strategically.
Sean, what you've described there is fascinating on a lot of levels, but let me offer 2 more of this. One is, you step back from this, take the personality of the companies aside. If you just look at the assets that Oracle has and Microsoft has, you can make a case, hey, this makes a lot of sense. But you add in the personalities, Oracle this runs so deeply against the grain of what they're doing. It's like, how the heck could that happen? But then you go back to the other side, and I think it was in an interview 2 years ago that Satya Nadella was asked, he said, if you could have any technology out there that Microsoft doesn't have, what would it be? And he instantly said the Oracle database. And the interviewer said, oh, I thought you'd pick the iPhone or something like that. And he said, nope, no hesitation. The Oracle database said it manages, the vast majority of the world's information. So you get this pragmatic view of it from Microsoft. And Sean, here's the other thing I wanted to mention to you. At the Sapphire event 6 weeks ago down in Florida, I was going into a meeting with Jen Morgan, who's now the president of their cloud business. And I go into the meeting, and here comes Jen Morgan, and right next to her is Judson Althoff, the executive VP of Microsoft's, commercial business. So sure. The 2 of them started then to talk about how they are trying now to get together because they want to help, because it's Microsoft, it's SAP, it's other cloud vendors, it's the integrators, it's the partners, everybody coming together and said, we're dumping all this on the customer and saying, you figure out all of our warring factions and you figure out how to make this stuff work together. So I think SAP, but it's also Microsoft, are driving this and saying, let's get out in front of this. Let's make this a little less painful and a lot more valuable for customers. So your point, let that ground truth be driven by customers, man. That's what they got to have, right?
100%. Like and I think that's the lesson outside of the tech industry too, right? Because this is not this build versus buy versus financially engineer, acquisition partner, like how you think about that split. That's not just a problem that resides inside, cloud vendors. That's every industry is trying to figure out how do we reinvent ourselves before, someone comes and disrupts us from the outside. And the takeaway that you can't miss is your customers are an amazing source of truth when you actually go and listen to them and talk to them about what they care about. It's just, that is the lesson. And it will be interesting to see how that lesson, I think, plays out in this very fluid ecosystem at the moment. I do want to go back to that comment about that interview with Satya though, because I missed that 2 years ago. But man, in hindsight, that was quite a tell on the direction Microsoft was going. Because like I might not have thought the iPhone, but I certainly would have thought Android would have been the answer, right? Like if you 2 years ago rewind the clock and think like, what technology does Microsoft wish they had? Boy, like controlling, mobile computing would have been, but man, that was an interesting tell. And we talked last time. I mean, I think Satya is CEO of the decade here. He's done an amazing job in what did not feel like an easy role. So it's not a criticism. It's just, it's fascinating how answers to that in 2 years now, they look so obvious. But at the time, that was such a surprising thing as that strategy was just beginning to roll out.
And now a quick break to hear from our sponsor. SAP Experience Management is helping businesses connect to their customers and then connect customers back to those businesses. Just listening to your customers is not enough. Businesses need to respond, react, and relate to them as individuals. Each one of them has his or her own likes, dislikes, and preferences. By combining experience data with operational data, SAP can help your business turn customer insights into actions that make their experiences better. SAP Experience Management helps you turn customers into fanatics and products into obsessions. Learn more at sap.com/xm, the best on SAP. Now back to the show. I'll send you the link to that because I'd heard something about it some months ago, but I looked at it again more recently. I'd written something about it. I believe it might have been CNBC, but probably 2 years ago. And the way Nadella speaks, he just the Oracle database. Of course, there's then hem and haw like, here's, let me give you three, not one. So but like you said, it really indicated a direction that's the market's going in. And you talked too, Sean, about this the build facet on the part of Oracle, because it is almost 2 years now, quarter after quarter after quarter. And when somebody like Larry Ellison says, we're betting our company on this product, which at the time, for a lot of those quarters when he mentioned that, had zero revenue. But he plays the long game.
That's right.
What would you then advise companies outside the tech industry? How do they try to do the similar sort of thing of saying, here's my indispensable attribute that I can apply, and how do I do it across those three channels?
Yeah, so on the build side, I think the build part is the hardest part, especially to your point, when you can't play the long game. Like not every CEO has the luxury that Larry does at Oracle in terms of playing the long game. And honestly, I think a lot of them get pushed into the partner and the buy side of things because they can't play the long game and do the build. And part of what we've been trying to figure out, and I don't claim to have figured this out yet, but we're trying to figure out is, I think it's important for financial metrics to sort of articulate the value of that before revenue has caught up with it. So if you think about my day job as a venture capitalist, we have lots of investments that we think are really, really valuable before they make $1 of revenue. And I'll often talk to CFOs at large publicly traded companies about this, and they'll say like, well, how do you value that? Like a multiple of losses? Like what's the financial math around that, right? And certainly somebody like a CEO who, or I guess he's not CEO anymore, but an owner of the business like Larry Ellison that's can play the long game there, right? Like he can be contrarian and take his time. If you're CEO of a CPG company, it may be hard to do 2 years of quarterly updates where you say, this thing I'm betting the company on is coming. Trust me, trust me, trust me, trust me. But if you can do that, right, then all of a sudden it's like, wow, then the market catches up with it. And I think what we need to do is we need to figure out how to value those types of activities in a way that is comfortable for Wall Street. To try to figure that out at the Corporate Startup Lab right now, where we're using option price theory to value this transformational innovation. Because today, most of the tools that are used to value that type of activity assume a normal distribution of returns, that sort of looks like a bell curve. And that's really helpful if you're making a capital investment to open another retail store, even an expensive retail store somewhere. But if you're doing something where the return curve does not look like a bell curve at all, but it looks more like a power law curve, right? Then calculating the average of it is kind of flawed. So there's a lot of math, and math is sort of notoriously not good for a podcast. So I won't go into all of the math, but let me just sort of illustrate the point with the challenge these folks are using today to value this, right? So if I said, what's the average temperature that people like to drink tea? The answer would be room temperature, because some people like hot tea and some people like iced tea, but almost nobody walks into a restaurant and says, oh, please serve me your finest glass of room temperature tea, right? And I think what you have happening in a lot of these companies, especially outside of tech, where often the owners and the CEOs don't have the same level of control that some of these tech executives do over their companies, is that they're trying to calculate the average value of this innovation when you can precisely calculate the average value, but it's a meaningless number because you end up with the equivalent of room temperature tea. And so what we're trying to do is say, okay, don't use math that assumes an average and a bell curve. Use math that assumes a couple of these work really well and a lot of them don't, and let's value it based on that. And so we've been, and that's where option pricing sort of leads you. And so we've been trying to figure that out, because I think we need to open up the opportunity for, large grocery chains and large CPG companies and chemical companies, people who are not Larry Ellison at Oracle or Satya Nadella at Microsoft, but these guys who are in these more traditional industries, to do the same type of, okay, this is how I value the build part of it, so that I can make an apples to apples comparison between the build strategy versus partnering or buying my way through it. And it's been interesting to watch people sort of wrestle with this. And I think that the cloud tech ecosystem is going to be a great case study a few years down the road. I don't want to wait. Like, I'm optimistic about what the CEO of a CPG company can do today. And I want him or her to be able to start playing in this stream today, as opposed to waiting for being disrupted from the outside in.
So, Sean, this is fantastic stuff. When you go in outside, talking to C-suite outside the tech industry, if there are, two or three, if there are two or three mistakes or mindsets that you have to help those people overcome to get to this view that's going to allow them to move as quickly and decisively and effectively as you've outlined there, what are those couple of things that just are obstacles right now for them?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot, but one of the things that I think is really important is this customer-centric philosophy, right? Like, if you can get these executives to go to that ground truth of what their customers care about, it solves a lot of other problems, just having that fleshed out. Another thing I think that becomes really important for a lot of these executives is to think about other business models that may not be how they currently monetize their relationships and the value that they provide, through that value chain. And when I guess one thing I should elaborate on the first point first is, when I say customers, I mean customers all the way through. So, you and I both participated in the IRI conference about a month ago, and you did a great keynote there. But one of the things I thought that was interesting is all the executives who kept in their mind trying to draw this distinction between users and customers, right? And it's like, you need to care about both. Like, this is not an or, this is an and. Like, you need to walk and chew gum. You need to care about your customers and your users. Like, this is how you do this, right? So I think step one is figuring that out. But the other thing is, as you start thinking about, really what your customers and users care about, often that ends up leading to a different business model than the business model that you've had to date. And that ripples through to cause lots of other challenges as well. So all of a sudden, you may go from a transactional relationship with your customers, where you transact with them once and then frankly hope they don't call you again, because that just adds to your cost of support, to a recurring relationship with your customer where they pay you less money every month. Now, this is cloud wars, so most of your audience, Bob, is thinking like, well, of course we know this. That's the difference between on-prem and SaaS, and that is one example of that, right? But in general, like, moving from a recurring relationship with a customer from this transactional relationship is actually a generalizable problem that the software industry has just illustrated through this on-prem versus SaaS relationship. You also may make money by connecting your customers with other people in the value chain, right? So more of a marketplace model versus a transactional model. Or you may end up in a situation where the data that your customers give you is so valuable that becomes a whole new revenue stream for you. And it's interesting to watch executives who are not tech executives start to learn the value of the data they have. I don't want to repeat the whole podcast from a month ago, but I think that's part of the brilliance of what SAP is doing with Qualtrics, right? And now Microsoft as well. Like everybody's going to have this sort of enterprise analytics BI solution, because you've got to teach these customers that data has a ton of value in their ecosystem. And there are non-obvious ways to do it, and not just because man, they will pay you money for it. And when you can tie it back to that ROI, like all of a sudden the finance department is very interested in that as well. So, I think there's a lot, and there's not a one size fits all to it. I think the closest to one size fits all certainly would be focused on your customers. And again, these customers can be users or the people who pay you customers today.
And I was, as you were describing that, I thought about a couple of examples. We had a guest on 2 or 3 months ago. He was a senior IT executive from Electrolux. So it's a 100-year-old Swedish company that made vacuum cleaners. He said one of the new businesses they're excited about is they have they sell vacuuming or vacuum your carpet as a service. So you can get a monthly subscription for those sorts of things. And some of the car companies are realizing that what the customers really would love not to have to deal with is stuff like insurance and registration and things like that. So some of them are building that in, and they're just giving it a different name. And so your point about these monthly types of ongoing relationships, and I loved how you put that, is cash the check from the customer, hope they never call you again. I mean, it sounds absurd, but it's so true, right? Like, it's going to raise my support costs. Don't call me again, or send me a text. My goodness.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Well, and I think also like the car company one is a really interesting example of this too, because some of that also starts to prepare them for other mega trends that are coming. And I don't know, I'm not smart enough to tell you, like, are they coming in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years? But it feels hard for me to believe that on the outer edge of that, trends like autonomous vehicles, electrification, ride sharing, like that those three things won't, in some combination, massively disrupt the auto industry. Right. And so if you're an automotive executive today, you can feel those trends coming at you. Right. And you can get ahead of this by changing your relationship with your customers and your business models. But remember, it comes back to this ground truth, in a way that your customers want. Like, I hear so many CEOs and C-suite executives bring me in and they're like, let me tell you what would be great for my business. I don't really like, that's not actually as relevant as you think it is. The right question is, what would your customers love? Oh, and then if you can find overlap with what your customers love and it works well for these transformations that you're trying to lead through your businesses, then magic happens, right? And I think the renting your car instead of owning your car, and taking care of service and insurance and all those things, like this really is a win for your customers, a win for where the industry is heading, and it starts to illustrate this business model transformation that I think is so key.
Sean, you hit on that, where you can get those two things that overlap, great for customers and could be good for you. It seems like one of the things that C-suites have to be able to master today is sort of this dual view of things, and they've got to be able to see two things simultaneously and synthesize where the overlap is or where the right future opportunity is. One is, as you're saying, what is it that customers more and more want and need, and how are their needs shifting, and requirements and expectations and demands? And then on the other side, that incumbency that you mentioned earlier, to keep a very nimble view of this. It's not, incumbency doesn't mean I got to keep doing this the way I've always done, but I have a set of assets. I have a set of capabilities. I've got a set of branding issues in the marketplace, a sense of trust where that exists, for relationships. And then how do I pull those things together?
That's right. That's right. And my hope is, and so this is a place where I really hope that technology industry and the vendors that you cover so closely can become real partners to these guys in this journey, right? Because I think the tech industry has actually gone through this quicker than the other industries and has a bunch of enabling technology to make this possible. Like the optimist in me wants to believe that they will take that approach and be that partner. I think the jury's still out, and certainly it doesn't mean they all will, but I hope that some of them do, because I think they can be great partners in this transformation that these companies need to go through. I think if you think about things like what we talked about a couple episodes ago, but it's an example I've come back to over and over again, and I know it's in your, you have a blog post on it as well, but what Kroger and Microsoft did together, right? Like that's the model in my mind of how a CEO and a C-suite tech executive can walk into the C-suite of one of their customers and help them through this progression. And I want to believe that the technology industry will do that. I spent, not as a journalist like you, but I spent, the first dozen years of my career building software companies. I love the software industry. I was a programmer by background. I want to believe that we're going to get to be helpful in this way. Time will tell, and I think vocabulary matters a lot, and we need the equivalent of the sort of Smarter Planet for what IBM did with Smarter Planet. We need the equivalent of that for this kind of corporate transformation. But I think there's a great opportunity for the technology industry to lead these executives through this, and if they do that well, create a ton of economic value for themselves and their customers, and make the world a better place. Which is what Silicon Valley, for so long has claimed it's all about. And frankly, this is not a political statement, but frankly, Silicon Valley is not nearly as revered as it was a few years ago. And I think if we can get back to interacting with customers that way and being part of, the Microsoft Kroger collaboration, instead of some of the challenges of the tech companies that have gone public in the last few months, Uber and Lyft most notably, or some of the challenges you've seen in some of the consumer tech companies, we have a chance to sort of reframe tech again in a way that is aspirational. And this is important because, my kids are 7 and 8 right now. And when I was 7 and 8, I knew when I grew up, I wanted to be a programmer. I wanted to spend my life in the tech industry. It's not clear to me that my son and daughter are going to feel that same way. And we need this. Like we need the industry needs to do this, like on a lot of levels. They need to do it for their shareholders, but they also need to do it just for the world. And so I'm excited about it. I want to believe we're going to do it. I think there's a ton of reasons why the industry has advantages to do it. I think there's a ton of personality and ego that may get in the way of that happening too, unfortunately. And so we'll see. And it doesn't necessarily mean that every single firm will, but it'll be fascinating to watch if we can be these trusted partners for these companies, because there's a ton of value to be created. I don't know you may know, but the Kroger story to me, like that's probably valuable from a bottom line perspective, but I bet it's at least as valuable from a cultural perspective. Like getting to do that has non-financial kind of cultural transformational values inside a place like Kroger.
Yeah, Sean, I'm going to give you a second here to think about a final question, because I'm going to ask if you can put a name to that 3-part expertise that companies need to have. What do you build? Where do you partner? Where do you invest? But I also, as you're thinking about that, I just wanted to put this idea out there. It's one of the reasons I really referred to that Oracle Microsoft thing as I was writing about that as a shocker. It makes sense. It's going to help both of those companies, but there is something inside of some companies that causes them to see things, as you said, well, hey, what would be good for my business? Well, that's all nice, but more and more, this is the customer-driven world. You want to get into the digital business world? Well, that is not about your convenience or your history or your tradition. It's about what customers want, and what they want is going to change and evolve, mutate, sometimes rapidly and sometimes quite inconveniently for people on the seller side. So it's going to require a whole new world. So I give Oracle a ton of credit for being willing to do this, for cutting against, some really deeply held cultural and behavioral and, mental mindsets that they've just had. They did not do this stuff. So I think that's great. It shows a lot of initiative and a lot of courage on their part. And Sean, I also think it's going to be one of those high impact things that other companies are going to look at and say, holy crap, if Oracle is willing to do this and Microsoft, these two companies, where else does it make sense? So I like you, the optimist wants to believe here. So Sean, can I circle back? Can we call this Ammirati's triangle?
I don't know if we can call it that, but it's some type of, I don't have a good term for it, but to me, it's really ecosystem thinking at the end of the day, right? It's like taking, and I think it's, again, I don't have a catchy name for it. I'll leave that to folks who are better at marketing than me, but it feels like there's some amount of this blend of being customer centric and then thinking kind of full stack ecosystem appropriately, that if you can do that right, you can really transform industries and create a ton of economic value and improve sort of the status quo across the board. And I think the tech industry does that well. And hopefully they can help others learn to do that well as well. We'll see. I'm optimistic.
Well, I like how you put ecosystem in there, Sean, because it forces the companies going through this exercise to think beyond their four walls and beyond their capabilities. It really is a very rich and deep opportunity. Well, Sean, thanks. This has been, as always, this has been great. Ammirati's Triangle is going to be up there among the great brands here in all of this. And I'm so happy to be your co-owner and co-developer. We'll get a contract, and it's a revenue share, right?
Perfect. Just like the Under Armour deal. As soon as you get that one done, we'll work on this one next.
Oh man, this is great. I'm rolling in it. Evans, you got it made. Sean, thanks so much. It's a treat always talking with you. And to all of you folks out there, thanks for being with us. Please share your feedback with me at bobevanspa@gmail.com. And next month, Sean will be back for another episode of Ammirati on innovation. Be sure to check out his podcast there about Agile Giants. Sean, thanks very much. We'll see you next time.